Welcome to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. So, where are you watching it from? And what are you doing right now? I hope you enjoyed this story. Tonight, we're traveling far from the noise of the day and into the soft, timeless hills of Middle-earth. Imagine yourself nestled in a warm burrow beneath the stars, the scent of wildflowers drifting through the open window, a small candle glowing gently on the table beside you. The fire crackles faintly in the hearth, casting slow, dancing shadows across the walls, while the world outside falls quiet. Let your thoughts slow down. Let your breath settle like evening fog over green fields. You are safe here. This moment is only for you. To rest, to breathe, to simply be. In the heart of the Shire, Gyr, where the days pass gently and the nights are filled with starlight, a humble hobbit is about to discover something far beyond the comfort of tea and gardening. This is a story not of great warriors or famous quests, but of quiet bravery, of choices made in silence, and of magic both old and hidden. So settle in, wrap yourself in the coziest blanket you have, and let this gentle tale carry you away to a world of wonder, mystery, and calm. Let your eyes grow heavy. Your mind drifts slowly like leaves on a soft stream as we begin. When a hobbit found the dark wizard's staff, Togo Boffin was not a hobbit known for adventure. In fact, he took great pride in his predictable days and quiet evenings. His home, a modest burrow tucked between two green mounds near the western edge of Hobbiton, was filled with baskets of turnips, polished gardening tools, and stacks of mushroom pies. His neighbors often said that Togo's garden bloomed a little brighter than the rest, and his carrots were among the straightest in the Shire. It was a peaceful life, full of muddy boots and well-steeped tea. The kind of life no one would bother to write stories about. Until the morning the earth spoke back to him. That day began like any other. Dew on the grass, the smell of bread from the mill, and birdsong in the hedgerows. Togo rose with the sun and carried his rusted shovel to the back patch where weeds had stubbornly returned. He worked methodically, humming a tune his mother had once sung while baking. The weeds came out easily, their roots shallow from spring rains. But just as he dug near the edge of a moss-covered stone, his shovel struck something hard, too solid to be a root, and too straight to be a rock. Curious, he crouched down and scraped away the soil with his hands, revealing the top of a blackened wooden shaft, partially wrapped in cracked leather and etched with strange curling lines. It shimmered faintly, even in the shade of the morning sun. Togo blinked, rubbed his eyes, then reached for it. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, a chill traveled up his arm, not cold like winter, but like forgotten things buried deep under time. He jerked back, breathing fast, yet the object remained still and silent. Against better judgment, he pulled it free from the earth. The stuff or stick, as Togo tried to tell himself, was longer than he'd thought, nearly the height of a man, gnarled and smooth in alternating places, as if touched by fire and frost both. It didn't seem ordinary, and hobbits didn't like anything that wasn't ordinary. But instead of tossing it aside, Togo wrapped it in an old gardening cloth and took it inside. He didn't know why. Perhaps it was the way it pulsed faintly in his hands, or the odd weight it carried. Not heavy, but important, like a secret. He placed it under his bed, thinking he'd decide what to do with it later. Yet, that night, he slept uneasily. His dreams were strange and colorless, filled with whispers in a language he didn't know, and shadows that loomed larger than trees. When he woke, his room was colder than usual, and there was a faint scent of smoke in the air, though his hearth had gone out. Togo tried to ignore the strange feelings, convincing himself it was all in his head. The next day, he worked in the cabbage rows, but couldn't stop glancing toward his round windows, half expecting something or someone to be watching. No one was there, of course. Yet the unease lingered. He skipped lunch, which was unheard of, and by afternoon he had made up his mind. He would ask someone wiser. He thought of the elves, but they were far away. Wizards, maybe, in addition to die. But none came to Hobbiton anymore. Then he remembered old Gaffer Gamgee, who was nearly 90 and full of tales, some true, some not. If anyone had heard of strange objects turning up in gardens, it would be him. Togo packed the staff again, more carefully this time, wrapping it in sackcloth and placing it at the bottom of a barrel of dried beans, and walked across the village with a quiet urgency in his step. As he passed the ivy-covered gate of number 7 Bagshot Row, Togo felt the air shift again. It might have been the breeze, or it might have been something else. Something that noticed the staff now being moved. Gaffer Gamgee sat in his usual spot on the porch, pipe in hand, his eyes hidden behind thick brows and time-wrinkled lids. He greeted Togo warmly, as he always did, and made room beside him on the bench. Togo hesitated, then sat down, feeling the wood of the bench press against his spine. For a while they talked of gardens and weather, and the unusually large mushrooms near Bywater. But eventually, Togo leaned in, lowered his voice, and said, "Gaffer, I found something, and I think it might be not meant to be found." That was enough to quiet the old hobbit's chuckle. When Gaffer saw the staff, he didn't speak at first. His pipe fell from his lips, landing softly on his lap. His hand trembled as he reached out to touch the leather wrapping, but stopped short. "Where'd you find this, lad?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. Togo told him everything, from the digging to the dreams. When he finished, Gaffer sat in silence, staring past the hedges as though remembering something long buried. Finally, he muttered, "There was talk once, after the war, of a staff lost. Belonged to one of the 9. Togo felt a jolt in his chest. The 9. The Nazgul. Shadows from the east. Servants of the darkness long vanquished. Or so the stories said. No one ever found it," Gaffer continued, "but they say it holds a piece of its master still. A whisper of his will. And now you've gone and dug it up like a wayward turnip." Togo tried to laugh, but it caught in his throat. "What do I do with it?" he asked, hoping for a simple answer. Bury it again, maybe. Burn it. Feed it to the goats. But Gaffer only looked at him with eyes that had seen more than most hobbits ever would. "Don't let it be seen. Don't let it be touched. And above all, don't let it be heard." Togo blinked. "Heard?" Gaffer nodded solemnly. "The dark speaks in dreams, lad. And some things never forget what they lost." That night, Togo didn't sleep. He sat at his table, a candle flickering low, listening for a voice he hoped would never come. But deep in his mind, under the layers of reason and fear, something stirred, and far away, in a land he'd never seen, a rider cloaked in silence turned westward. Togo spent the next day in a haze, the kind of fog that drifts into the mind rather than the air. He tried to work, trim the hedges, sort the onion bulbs, sweep the garden path, but everything felt off-kilter. Every sound felt too sharp, every breeze too cold, as though the world itself was whispering warnings he couldn't quite understand. His neighbors greeted him as usual, but their voices sounded distant, almost as if spoken through a pane of thick glass. He nodded politely, forcing a smile, yet his thoughts were stuck on the staff beneath his floorboards. It was hidden beneath loose wooden planks now, wrapped in cloth and herbs from his mother's old cupboard, though he doubted rosemary could ward off something that once served the Nine. That name echoed in his chest like a forgotten bell. The Nine. He had never imagined something from their time could be real, let alone buried beneath his cabbages. It was late afternoon when Togo gathered the courage to return to Gaffer Gamgee. The old hobbit hadn't said much after their last talk, only muttered something about old magic gone quiet, and warned Togo not to speak of the staff again. Not to anyone, not even himself. But Togo needed more than silence. He needed answers. He found Gaffer in the same spot, puffing at his pipe with a gaze that reached far past the fields of the Shire. This time, when Togo approached, Gaffer didn't smile. "You brought it with you again?" he asked, eyes narrowing beneath thick brows. "No," Togo replied quickly. "It's still under my floor." Gaffer grunted, then tapped the ashes from his pipe. "Then let's hope it stays there. But I suppose I owe you a story, seeing as you're tangled in one lantern." Togo sat beside him, barely breathing. The wind shifted. Somewhere, a raven cawed and flew east. "There was a time," Gaffer began, "when the world felt different. Not just darker, but heavier. Like every shadow might carry a secret too dangerous to speak aloud. Back then, folk didn't walk alone at night, not even in the Shire. The War of the Ring saw to that. But before that, long before the eye fell, there were whispers of things being hidden, things too evil to be destroyed, yet too dangerous to be kept. The staff you found was one of them." Togo frowned. "But why bury it here? Why the Shire?" Gaffer's eyes flicked toward the hills. "Because no one would expect it. That's always been our curse and our blessing. The world forgets hobbits. We're quiet, and the quiet places are where dangerous things go to sleep." Togo felt his fingers curl tightly. "And now it's awake again?" Gaffer looked at him, tired and old. "Not fully, but something's listening." That night, the dreams returned. Togo saw a pale sky, full of swirling black clouds, and a tower that rose higher than any mountain he'd ever known. There were no stars, only a single red flame hovering far above, unblinking and vast. Around him, shapes moved, cloaked riders without faces, circling slowly, whispering in words that made his ears ring even in the dream. Then he saw himself, small and alone, standing at the base of the tower, clutching the staff. It pulsed in his hands, and the ground beneath him cracked, spilling light and smoke. He awoke, gasping, sweat soaking his nightshirt, the covers tangled at his feet. It was still dark, but something felt wrong. His window, usually fogged by morning dew, was wide open. He hadn't opened it. The cold poured in like mist. He got up slowly, heart thudding in his chest, and looked out. There was nothing, only the silent curve of the hills and the glimmer of moonlight on grass. Yet he was sure something had been there, watching, waiting. The next morning he heard from his neighbor, Daisy Proudfoot, that 2 of her chickens had vanished overnight, feathers scattered like snow across the yard. Foxes, maybe, she muttered. But her eyes said she didn't believe it. By noon, the brandybucks were talking about strange hoof prints by the stream. Too big for ponies, too narrow for cows. The whispers grew fast. Togo kept his head low, barely speaking to anyone. He thought about leaving the Shire just for a while, but where would he go? Bree? Too close. Rivendell too far. He needed guidance, real guidance. Not stories, not riddles. And there was only one place he could think of that might still hold that kind of wisdom. He remembered hearing once about a dwarf who passed through Bywater speaking of Gandalf, and how the wizard had friends and allies still keeping watch over Middle-earth. One of them, said the dwarf, had stayed behind after the war, an old traveller named Radagast, who spoke with birds and walked where men feared to tread. Togo didn't know if the story was true, but it gave him hope. Maybe Radagast would know what to do. Maybe he could take the stuff, or seal it, or bury it deeper than a hobbit's shovel could reach. The problem, of course, was finding him, and doing it before the dreams stopped being dreams. That night, as Togo stared at the low ceiling of his burrow, he heard something brush the door. Not knock, just brush. Like a hand too long, or a rogue dragging past wood. He sat still for hours, not even daring to breathe too loud. When morning came, he found no marks outside. Yet the unease lingered. He knew now, truly knew, that something was looking for the staff. Not just wandering blindly, but hunting step by step, sniffing out the traces of its power. Gaffer had warned him, and the warning had been real. So Togo made his decision. He would leave Hobbiton. Not forever, he hoped, but for long enough to find someone who could help. He packed light: bread, dried apples, a flask of spring water, and the staff, sealed in oilcloth and tied with rope. As he stood at the edge of his garden, looking back at the home he loved, a robin perched on his gate. It tilted its head and chirped once, as if in farewell. Then it flew east, and so did Togo Boffin, quietly, with fear behind him, and something much darker ahead. The road eastward from Hobbiton was quiet in the early light. Mist still clung to the roots of the hedgerows, and the birds had not yet begun their full chorus. Togo walked with careful steps, his pack light upon his shoulders, and the wrapped staff pressing against his back like a silent burden. Every so often he glanced behind him, half expecting to see a cloaked rider galloping out from behind a tree, or a black shape on the horizon. But there was nothing, only the slow, steady unfolding of the road and the sigh of the wind through the grass. It was the furthest Togo had ever travelled alone. Bywater soon fell behind, and the rolling hills turned into woods, the kind of woods hobbits preferred to avoid. The trees here were older, gnarled and tangled together, and the path became little more than a dirt thread between roots. Togo kept walking, his thoughts a swirl of fear and wonder. Part of him still couldn't believe he was doing this, leaving the Shire, seeking a wizard, quarrying something that might belong to the ancient evils of the world. It sounded like a tale meant for elves or men of distant kingdoms, not a gardener with muddy boots. Yet the staff was real, the dreams were real, and the feeling that something watched him from just beyond the trees, that was real too. As the day wore on, the sun began to warm the earth, and the mist retreated. Togo paused to rest by a mossy stone, nibbling on a slice of bread and apple, trying to push away the heavy thoughts. A rustling in the brush nearby startled him, and he gripped the cloth-wrapped staff instinctively. But it was only a hedgehog, waddling through the leaves, unconcerned. He let out a breath and chuckled softly, more from nerves than humor. "You're not the one being chased, are you?" he said to the hedgehog, who paused only briefly before disappearing into the undergrowth. It was strange speaking aloud to no one, but the silence of the forest was beginning to feel too large. Togo set off again, following a narrow game trail that bent eastward. He knew that Radagast's old haunts were said to lie somewhere near Rosgobel, far beyond the Anduin, though even that was just hearsay. Togo didn't know how far he'd get, only that he had to try. By afternoon, the trees parted enough for sunlight to dapple the ground, and he came upon a small clearing with a stone well at its center. It looked ancient, crumbling with moss and half swallowed by vines. But what caught his eye was the bird perched on its rim. The bird was not like any he'd seen in the Shire. Its feathers shimmered with gold and blue, and its eyes sparkled with uncanny awareness. Togo froze as it tilted its head, studying him. Then it let out a single melodic chirp that echoed longer than seemed natural. The moment stretched, and Togo felt the hairs on his arms rise. Then the bird flapped its wings and flew off, not west but east, its flight graceful and sure. Togo stood still for a moment, heart fluttering like a leaf. He didn't know why, but it felt as though the bird had been waiting for him or guiding him. He stepped to the edge of the well and peered inside. It was deep, dry, and silent. No signs of life, no signs of use. Just one of many forgotten things in a world that had moved on. Still, the moment stayed with him. The forest thickened again, and Togo began to feel the press of evening coming. Shadows stretched longer, and the light turned amber through the canopy. He knew he couldn't sleep in the open, not with the dreams, and certainly not with the staff in his pack. So he looked for shelter, and eventually found a hollow beneath the roots of an ancient tree, wide enough to crawl into and dry enough to rest. He built a small fire with care, just enough to warm his hands and keep the dark at bay, and ate the last of his bread. The staff remained wrapped and untouched, but he felt its presence as clearly as if it were beside him. When he finally drifted into sleep, the forest held its breath, and in the darkness of his dreams, the tower returned, closer this time. He could see windows like wounds in the stone, and behind them eyes. He woke suddenly, the fire down to embers. There was a sound, not loud, but distinct. Something had snapped, not far from his hiding place. Togo's breath caught in his throat. He didn't move, didn't speak. The forest too had gone quiet. No birds, no wind, only the slow tick of fear crawling up his spine. He reached for the staff without thinking, holding it close. Then he saw it. Just beyond the edge of the tree roots, a figure, not tall like a man, nor short like a hobbit. Its shape was all wrong, as if made of smoke and robes. It stood still, facing him. No face, no sound. Just a coldness, that seeped into the earth itself. Togo didn't move. He didn't even breathe. After a long moment, the figure turned, gliding silently back into the woods. And then it was gone. Togo sat there until dawn broke. He hadn't slept again, too afraid to close his eyes. The encounter left him shaken, and more sure than ever that the staff needed to be taken far away. That thing, whatever it had been, wasn't just wandering. It had come for the staff, but why hadn't it taken it? Why had it turned away? He couldn't answer that. All he knew was that he needed to keep moving. He doused the embers, shouldered his pack, and began walking again, this time without pause. The trees slowly gave way to open land. Low hills with wild flowers and long grass, the smell of pine in the distance. It was beautiful in a quiet, forgotten way. And yet, even here, Togo felt the faint pull of something behind him. The road ahead was longer than he'd imagined. But he had made his choice. He would not turn back now. The hills rolled out before Togo like gentle waves turned to earth, green and golden under the late morning sun. After days in the forest, the open sky felt vast and strange above him, as though he were being watched from above by things unseen. The breeze carried scents of wild thyme and heather, and though the land was quiet, it was not lifeless. Hares darted through the grass. Bees hummed from flower to flower. But Togo couldn't shake the feeling that something still trailed his steps. Not close, not yet, but near enough to press against the edges of his thoughts. He had left the woods behind, but the silence of the figure in the roots haunted him. Every creak of wind, every rustle of a bird's wing brought a jolt of dread to his chest. The staff, though still wrapped and untouched, seemed warmer now and heavier. That afternoon, he reached a narrow brook with stepping stones worn smooth by time. He paused to wash his face and refill his flask, kneeling beside the water's edge. The coolness felt good on his skin, but when he looked into the stream, he saw something that wasn't his reflection. A flicker, brief but clear, of a face that was not his. Pale, ancient, with hollow eyes that stared through him. He gasped and stumbled back, nearly losing his balance. When he looked again, there was only his own frightened face staring back, heart pounding. He backed away from the water and sat against a rock, trying to steady his breath. He couldn't tell if it was the staff playing tricks or something else entirely. But one thing was becoming clear. The further he carried it, the more the world around him bent in subtle, unnatural ways. By nightfall, Togo found a crumbling stone structure nestled in a shallow dip between the hills. It looked like the ruins of a watchpost, perhaps from an old road long abandoned. Its roof had fallen in, but the walls stood mostly firm, and he took shelter there as the sky darkened. He lit a small fire in the corner, careful not to let the smoke rise too high. As he sat, eating the last of his dried apples, he noticed a carving on one of the stones, faint and worn by weather. It was a star, encircled by runes he couldn't read. Yet the symbol sparked something faint in his memory, like a name half remembered in a dream. He reached out to touch it, and for a moment the stone felt warm, not threatening, but calm, like a hand resting on his shoulder. He slept that night more deeply than he had in days. The next morning brought something unexpected. As he packed his things, he heard voices, not distant echoes or ghostly whispers, but real warm voices coming from beyond the hill. He froze, then crept up to the ridge and peered over. There, moving along a worn trail, was a small caravan. A pair of dwarves walking alongside a stout pony, pulling a cart loaded with tools and barrels. Togo hesitated. He hadn't spoken to anyone in days, and part of him feared they might sense what he carried. But he also knew that traveling alone couldn't last forever. He made his way down carefully and greeted them with a wave and a nervous smile. The dwarves, surprised to see a hobbit so far from home, welcomed him with curious glances and cheerful voices. "What brings the Shire folk out here?" one of them asked. Togo paused, then replied simply, "A journey I didn't plan." They introduced themselves as Baldrin and Ori, traders from the Blue Mountains, returning from a circuit through the scattered farms east of Bree. They were kind enough to offer him a seat on their cart for a while, and though the pace was slow, the company was comforting. Togo kept the staff hidden deep in his pack, not mentioning it. He told them he was headed east to find an old friend of his uncle's, a half-truth, but close enough. They didn't pry. That night, camped under a stand of wind-bent trees, they shared ale and stories of old roads and forgotten towns. Togo listened more than he spoke, grateful for the sounds of laughter and the crackle of firewood. For a little while, the burden of the staff seemed less heavy. But when he slept, the dreams returned, darker than before, and filled with whispers he couldn't understand. On the third morning, as the sun broke over a ridge, a shadow passed overhead. All three looked up, and Togo's breath caught in his throat. It was a great bird, black-feathered, with wings wide as sails. It circled once, then flew on eastward. Baldrin muttered something in Kuzdul, a dwarven curse, and Ori spat into the grass. "Gouts," Ori said. "Not ours, not friendly." Togo felt the weight of the staff like a stone pressing against his spine. He knew that thing wasn't looking for them. It was looking for him. That evening, he told the dwarves he had to part ways. They protested kindly, but he insisted. "Thank you," he said, "for reminding me what good company feels like." And so, with his pack on his shoulders and the hills stretching before him once more, Togo Boffin walked east, toward the mountains, and toward the name he now clung to, Radagast. He travelled now with more urgency, though he still dared not walk by night. The land grew steeper, the soil rockier, and the trees taller and older again. There were fewer signs of people and no farms, no travellers. Only the paths of deer and foxes and the occasional ruins half swallowed by the land. The silence here was not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that waits. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in hues of violet and gold, Togo heard something new, a soft song, drifting on the wind. He followed it, unsure whether it was real or imagined, until he reached a glade where moonlight filtered through silver leaves. There, standing beside a stream, was a cool figure in robes, the colour of birch bark, with a staff of twisted root in one hand. The figure turned and Togo stopped, heart hammering. The eyes that met his were clear and kind, but also very, very old. Togo stood frozen at the edge of the glade, heart pounding as if it wished to flee from his chest. The figure by the stream did not move toward him, nor show any sign of alarm. He simply watched, as though he had known Togo would arrive at this very moment, in this very place. The stillness of the scene was unlike anything the Hobbit had known. The wind didn't stir the leaves, and even the birds had fallen silent. It was not an empty silence, but one filled with meaning, as if the trees themselves held their breath. Slowly, the figure raised one hand, not in warning, but in greeting, and spoke with a voice like wind through old branches. "You've come far, little one, and you carry a shadow in your pack." Togo's throat was dry, but he managed a nod, stepping forward, unsure whether to bow or simply sit. I think I need help," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I didn't mean to take it. I found it, but I didn't know what it was. Now they're following me. I have dreams, visions, and I think it's changing me." The wizard, if indeed he was one, tilted his head gently, studying the hobbit. He was tall, though not imposing, with a long beard streaked with pale gold and eyes that seemed older than mountains. Around his shoulders clung a mantle of moss and feathers, and small creatures moved in the shadows behind him. Rabbits, birds, and foxes, unafraid. "My name is Radagast," he said at last, voice soft but clear. "And you are brave, Togo Boffin, braver than you know." Togo's eyes widened. He had not spoken his name aloud. But the wizard simply smiled, as if the answer had been written in the air. Radagast gestured for him to sit by the stream, and Togo lowered himself gratefully onto the grass, the staff still wrapped tightly in cloth and strapped to his back. He was suddenly aware of how tired he was, how deeply the journey had worn him down. Radagast crouched beside him and motioned with his fingers. The stuff floated gently from Togo's pack and hovered in the air between them. The wizard did not touch it. Instead, he looked at it with a deep frown, as though recognizing an old wound. "This staff belonged to Morlach," he said, "a name long banished, but not forgotten. He was one of the 5 once, one of us, sent across the sea to guide, not to rule. But power is a poison to those who believe themselves above the rest." Togo shivered. "What happened to him?" he asked quietly. Radagast's gaze darkened like a sky before storm. "Morlach strayed far from his path," the wizard murmured. "He sought to bend creatures to his will, not walk beside them. When he failed to dominate the free peoples, he vanished. Banished, we thought. But it seems he left something behind, a shard of his will, bound in that staff." Togo felt a sick twist in his stomach. "Is it alive?" he asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Radagast nodded slowly. "Not alive as you or I are, but yes, it remembers. It yearns, it calls to its master or to any fool willing to carry its burden." Togo looked down, guilt rising in his chest. "I should have left it, buried it deeper." But Radagast placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "No, Togo, many would have used it. You resisted. That is no small feat. The staff chose you not for your strength, but for your innocence. That may yet save you." The firelight danced between them as the sun faded behind the trees. Radagast lit a circle of soft blue flame, using only a whisper. And from his satchel, he drew herbs and stones, arranging them with care around the staff. He began to chant in a tongue Togo could not understand, ancient, flowing like water and leaves. As the spell deepened, the forest around them shimmered faintly, as though reality itself had thinned. The staff began to tremble. A dark mist oozed from its carvings, rising like smoke. Togo watched in awe and terror as the shapes writhed. Faces, claws, wings, and then, slowly, They faded into the sky, vanishing with a hiss. Radagast exhaled, beads of sweat on his brow. "It is quieter now," he said, "but not silenced. The bond between you and it is still there. It knows you. It will seek you again." Togo's heart sank, yet something in him steadied. That night, they camped under a canopy of silver-leaved trees. Togo slept deeply, the staff laid carefully between stones, etched with runes, to hold its power at bay. For the first time in many nights, there were no dreams, no towers, no whispers, only peace, like a breath held and released. When he woke, the morning was golden, and Radagast stood by the stream, speaking softly to a squirrel perched on his arm. Togo joined him, still weary but lighter somehow, as though a great weight had shifted just slightly off his shoulders. "What should I do now?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "You must go east," Radagast said simply. "There is a place here that's where the staff can be hidden, far from prying eyes, deep beneath the roots of the mountains. But you cannot go alone." He whistled, and from the trees came a large brown bird, an eagle, fierce and noble. "This is Eleanor," said Radagast. "She will carry you part of the way. After that, you must walk." Togo stared in amazement as the eagle bowed its head toward him. "Why not destroy the staff?" he asked. Radagast looked into the trees. Some things cannot be destroyed, only guarded. Fire may burn it, but not what lies within. To destroy it would risk releasing what still clings to it. And we are not ready for that. Togo nodded slowly, the truth sinking in like stone. He wasn't just a gardener anymore. He was a bearer of something terrible. And though he didn't want it, he would carry it as far as he could. He climbed onto Eleanor's back, clutching tight as the bird spread her wings and leapt into the air. The earth fell away, and the wind rushed past his face. Below, Radagast grew small, until he was no more than a speck among the trees. As the eagle soared over the hills and forests, Togo looked ahead, where mountains loomed like sleeping giants. The sky was clear, but he felt the pull of shadow waiting beyond those peaks. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it, staff in hand, heart still shaking, but no longer alone. The wind whipped through Togo's hair as Eleanor soared above the ridges and forests, her great wings slicing the morning sky with smooth, powerful strokes. The world below looked dreamlike. Tiny streams glinted like silver threads. Trees stood like tufts of moss, and the distant hills curved in soft, ancient lines. Togo clung to the leather harness fastened around the eagle's back, the wrapped staff secured beside him, its weight a constant reminder. Despite the beauty of the skies, he could not shake the feeling that he was being watched, not by eyes on the ground, but by something hidden among the clouds themselves. He kept glancing behind them, half expecting dark wings to burst from the bed and give chase. Yet Eleanor flew without fear, and her silence was that of deep wisdom, as though she had carried burdens like this before. After several hours, the land below began to change. The greens of the lowlands gave way to darker hues, pine forests climbing the slopes, cliffs rising in jagged walls, and narrow valleys that twisted like veins through the earth. Mountains loomed now, vast and cold, their peaks veiled in snow and mist. Eleanor circled downward toward a craggy outcrop near a steep ravine. Togo felt the eagle begin her descent and held tight as she glided smoothly toward a rocky ledge nestled beneath a stone arch. With a final beat of her wings, Eleanor touched down gently, talons clicking on the rock. Togo slid off, legs shaky but grateful for solid ground. The eagle gave a low cry, a sound both musical and mournful, and nuzzled him once with her beak. Then, without a word, she took to the sky again, vanishing into the clouds above. The place was remote, high above the forest floor, where few paths dared tread. The air was thinner, crisper, and laced with the scent of frost and stone. A narrow trail wound its way downward from the ledge, disappearing into a thick grove of pine. Togo took a deep breath and began walking, boots crunching softly on gravel and dried needles. The mountains were silent, save for the occasional rustle of wind or the distant cry of birds. He felt exposed, yet oddly comforted, as if the land itself watched over him with solemn indifference. He had never travelled so far from home, never seen trees this tall or cliffs this steep. And though fear walked beside him, it no longer led the way. Every step was a choice, a quiet act of courage from a hobbit who only a week ago tended roses in peace. As the trail descended, the forest thickened. Towering evergreens blocked much of the sunlight, casting the path in perpetual twilight. Strange mushrooms grew at the roots of gnarled trees, glowing faintly like forgotten lanterns. Togo passed ancient stone markers, etched with runes he could not read, half buried by moss and time. He knew this place had been walked before, by rangers, perhaps, or older beings who no longer moved in the waking world. After hours of cautious travel, he reached a narrow pass between two steep cliffs. The shadows here felt denser, the air colder. He hesitated before stepping through. The stuff pulsed faintly beneath the wrappings, as if it too recognized this place. And then came the sound that froze his heart. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, echoing through the rocks ahead. Togo ducked behind a stone outcrop, heart pounding in his ears. The footsteps grew louder. A moment later, a figure emerged from the shadows. A tall man in a black cloak, hood drawn low over his face. He walked with slow precision, a curved blade hanging at his side. Behind him came another, and then a third. Their movements were coordinated, practiced. They carried no torches, yet navigated the darkness as if born to it. Togo held his breath, barely daring to blink. The figures paused near where he hid, whispering in a tongue that felt sharp and dry, like dead leaves blowing over stone. One of them sniffed at the air and turned slightly. Head cocked as if listening, Togo curled tighter, every muscle trembling. After a long pause, the figures moved on, continuing into the dark woods. When their footsteps finally faded, he remained still for many more minutes, afraid even his heartbeat might call them back. When he was sure they were gone, Togo rose slowly and resumed his path, now more alert than ever. He knew without doubt that they were hunting the staff and that they had come close. Too close. He quickened his pace, though fatigue weighed heavily on his limbs. The trail led him into a narrow gully where water once flowed, now dried to pebbles and cracked mud. Strange symbols had been carved into the rock walls, some glowing faintly, others chipped and scarred. As he passed, the staff pulsed again, and he felt a presence stir beneath his thoughts. like a whisper just out of reach. He tried to ignore it, focusing on Radagast's words. There was a place where the staff could be hidden. He had to trust that his path would lead there soon, even as the light faded and night crept in once more. By dusk, he reached a hollow beneath a shelf of stone where twisted roots hung like ropes from above. It offered enough shelter to rest, though unease prickled at the edges of his mind. He lit a small fire with care, the warmth chasing back the cold. As he sat eating the last of his bread, his thoughts drifted home. Warm kitchens, clinking cups, soft beds, the sound of birdsong in the morning. It felt a world away. He looked at the staff, still wrapped, but now visibly thrumming with dark energy. He spoke softly to it, as if to a restless beast. "You're not going to win, he said. "Not with me." And though it gave no answer, something in the air shifted, just slightly, as if it too was listening. He lay down beside the fire, cloak wrapped tight, the staff between him and the open dark. Sleep did not come easily. His dreams were muddled, flickering between light and shadow, warmth and ice. At one point, he saw his own reflection speaking to him, though the mouth moved with someone else's voice. "You carry more than wood and magic," it said. "You carry choice." He woke with a start, heart racing, and found the fire had burned low. The forest beyond the shelter was still and quiet, but not calm. He sensed something waiting, something watching. But morning was near. The darkest hour had passed. He packed his things, slung the staff across his back, and stepped out once more into the grey light of dawn. The path ahead twisted into a rocky ravine where no birds song, and the stones whispered memories too old for comfort. Still, Togo walked, alone but unbroken, toward the final leg of his journey. The final stretch of Togo's journey led him into the hollow heart of the mountains, where light faltered and silence pressed like a heavy shroud. The path narrowed between walls of stone, ancient and cracked, bearing the marks of time and forgotten passage. Here, the sky vanished behind a ceiling of rock and moss, and the only sounds were the echoes of his own footsteps. The stuff on his back throbbed softly now, no longer resisting him, but humming like a caged heartbeat. It was as if it knew somehow that its end was near, that the long shadows it once cast would be buried deep where even dreams could not follow. Togo moved forward with quiet resolve, each step deliberate, steady, like the ticking of a clock nearing its last chime. He had grown leaner, more weathered, yet there was strength in his eyes that had not been there before. He reached a broken arch carved into the stone wall, half collapsed and hidden by creeping ivy. The symbols etched into the arch glowed faintly when he approached. Soft silver light, like moonlight through mist. A breeze passed through the doorway, impossibly cold, and tinged with the scent of snow and starlight, though the sky above was long gone. He stepped through. Beyond the arch lay a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in shadow. Ancient roots hung down from above, thick and coiled, like sleeping serpents. In the center of the chamber stood a circle of standing stones, each taller than a troll, worn smooth by time. A basin of crystal sat in the middle, filled with water that reflected no light. Togo felt the air shift around him, as if the cavern itself had awakened, waiting to see what he would do next. He moved forward slowly, the staff in his hands now, unwrapped and bare. The carvings along its length writhed with faint traces of dark power, but the staff no longer pulled at him. Instead, it trembled, unsure, like a beast sensing its own defeat. As he approached the crystal basin, his breath quickened. A voice stirred in his mind, faint and oily, promising freedom, strength, safety, whispers that tugged at his deepest fears and hopes. You could be more, it said. You could protect them all. No one would push you aside again. But Togo had heard these words before, in dreams and shadows, and he knew now they were lies. He tightened his grip on the staff, knelt beside the basin, and dipped its tip into the still water. Instantly the cavern shuddered as light burst forth from the stones around him. A circle of pure white fire rose around the basin, and the water within began to glow like starlight. The staff thrashed in his hands, alive with rage and desperation. Shadows screamed from its surface, faces twisted in torment, claws reaching out. Yet Togo held firm, arms steady, heart unwavering. No more, he whispered. Your time is over. The basin flared with brilliant light, and the staff gave one final shuddering cry before splitting in two with a sound like thunder. Dark mist burst into the air, but the stones glowed brighter, the runes humming a low chant that grew into song. The darkness tried to escape, but it was caught, pulled into the water where it was sealed, bound beneath layers of ancient magic. When it was done, only silence remained. Togo knelt there for a long moment, breathing hard, hands trembling. He laid the broken halves of the staff into the basin and stepped back. The water stilled once more, calm and dark, now holding within it the weight of something ancient and dangerous, sealed away not by force, but by choice. Togo looked around the chamber, and though no voice spoke, he felt something in the air shift, a quiet acknowledgement, a farewell, perhaps even a blessing. He turned and began the long walk back toward the surface, feet dragging, but spirit light. The path did not seem as dark now. The echoes felt less empty. When he emerged from the tunnel into the grey light of dusk, the mountains no longer loomed like walls, but like guardians, silent, steady, and vast. The sky above was tinged with lavender, stars blinking to life one by one. He stood there a while, simply breathing, eyes closed. The journey home was slower. Without Eleanor to carry him, Togo made his way down the mountain paths on foot. His thoughts quiet and inward. He met no more pursuers. Whether they had lost his trail or sensed the staff's destruction, he did not know. But the burden he had carried for days was gone, and in its place was something else. An invisible thread of strength woven through his soul. He passed through valleys and streams, shared fires with wandering dwarves and kind-hearted rangers. None asked his name, but all seemed to recognize something in his eyes, as if they sensed the journey he had made. When at last he reached the borders of the Shire, the fields rolled green and wide before him, and the smell of pipeweed and baking bread drifted through the air. He smiled, not with relief, but with quiet gratitude. The familiar hills of Hobbiton welcomed him like an old friend. The sun had just begun to rise, casting golden light across the grass and rooftops. Togo walked through the village slowly, nodding to neighbors, who blinked in surprise at his return. "You've been off adventuring, have you?" one called with a grin. "Lost your spade in the woods, did you?" He laughed softly, waving but offering no tales. What he had seen was not meant for stories by the fire. Not yet. When he reached his small round door, he paused. The garden was overgrown, weeds curling around the fence posts, flowers wilting from neglect. He knelt, ran his fingers through the soil, and felt the earth welcome him back. That evening, he lit a small lamp, brewed tea, and watched the stars rise over his garden. No voices whispered, no shadows lingered. And so the tale of Togo Boffin ended, not in glory or renown, but in peace. He never spoke of the staff, nor of Radagast, nor of the deep places beneath the mountain. But he tended his garden with new care, planting herbs that glowed faintly at night and flowers that never wilted. And on some nights, when the wind was right, he would gaze toward the east with a knowing smile, as though listening for the song of stones and stars. He was still a hobbit, humble, quiet, fond of tea and toast, but something in him had changed, and though he never sought adventure again, he knew that if it ever came calling, he would not be afraid. And now, dear listener, the story comes to a gentle close. The stars still hang above the Shire, quiet and bright, and the hills rest under the hush of the night. Togo Boffin, the humble gardener who once walked among shadows and starlight, is back where he belongs, home, safe, and at peace. Perhaps, like him, you too are ready to return from your own wandering thoughts. Let this be your signal to soften your shoulders, to release the last worries of your day, and to let the stillness around you settle gently in your chest, like the hush of a quiet morning after rain. You have traveled far tonight, through woods and mountains, mystery and magic, and yet here you are, right where you need to be. Let the comfort of familiar things surround you now, the softness of your pillow, the rhythm of your breath, the warmth of being wrapped in quiet and calm. Let go. No more need to chase or solve, only to rest. The world can wait until morning. For now, there is only this stillness, this softness, this peace. Thank you for spending your time here at the Cozy Storytime. If this tale brought a little light to your night, don't forget to subscribe and like the video so we can keep sharing these gentle journeys together. May your dreams be kind, your sleep deep, and your heart light when the sun rises again. Until next time, sleep well, and may your night be filled with peace.